I'm Heather Fleming, founder of In Purpose Educational Services and author of the book, My Black Friend Says.
And I'm Delaney Ray, the coordinator of the LEAP Institute. So what do we do now, Heather?
Same thing we've always done, Delaney. Keep fighting for an equitable world.
This time in a podcast.
Welcome to the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, where comfortable friends chat about uncomfortable topics.
Let's do it.
Hey, Delaney.
Yes, Heather.
So, you know what is big holiday is coming up?
Tell me, what big holiday is coming up?
Dr. Martin Luther King Day.
Oh, that's right.
I know, yeah. So January 15th is his actual birthday. He would have been, I think, 92 years old. But we actually celebrate as a nation on the 18th, which is Monday.
So we're recording this on Tuesday the 12th. So yeah, we're just a few days out.
Yep. How are you going to celebrate?
So that's a good question. When I had little kids that were still, elementary school age, we had several children's books that were about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that we would read every year. And I would also try to have them listen to parts of his, usually the I Have a Dream speech. They were too little to listen in the entirety, but I would usually try to at least get them to sit and watch a little bit to get familiar with who he was. Now that I don't have littles anymore, I've tried to kind of ramp up my game a little. 2 years ago, I was homeschooling an 8th grader, and we actually studied John Lewis's trilogy, the March trilogy, around this time to dive deeper and learn more. And I try to look into more of his writings than, I did with when I had little kids, and it was just that very surface level children's books. What do you usually do?
Well, and I was going to tell the audience that there's a lot of different things that you can do to celebrate Dr. King. And so, a lot of people have days of service, which I think is always a good idea, to honor his memory by actually serving others. And so finding a nonprofit or some organization that you can go and actually dedicate your time to on that day would be really good. Also, there's lots of different celebrations around the area, and so maybe you can tune into those. Hopefully, most of those celebrations this year are virtual. There's a lot of virtual options so that we don't have to gather at super spreader events, but you can participate in that. But the big thing is, what I want my kids to do is to read a little bit more than I Have a Dream speech. And so that ends up being my question too. Which King do you celebrate, Delaney?
Right. And I think, as I was saying, when my kids were little and it was something as a family that we were talking about, I fell into what most people do, which is learning about and celebrating this very surface level, watered down version of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I have started learning more about as I have sought deeper pieces of his writings and information. And I'm learning now that, there was a lot more to him and to what he taught than this version of let's all hold hands and get along.
And that's what I really want to, as people begin to, study him and to celebrate him, is to realize that we need to celebrate the real Dr. King, not the one that has been, whitewashed, quite frankly. And the reasons for that whitewashing, there's several, could be several different ones, but one of them is that the King that we see presented today is the one that's been made more palatable to white people who struggle with really diving in and talking about the issue of race. And so that's the King that says, judging, he wants his children to be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And so the interpretation has been, well, that means that we just don't need to see skin color. That's not what the real Dr. King said. And so some of these words, when taken out of context, they're able to be presented as someone that was, beloved even in his own time. And one of the things that we know, if we dig deeper, is that he was in fact not beloved at all. As a matter of fact, while he was living and at the height of the civil rights movement, his approval rating among white people was in the 20s.
Wow.
In the 20th percentile. And so most of white America disapproved of him. And some of the same things that they said of Colin Kaepernick and other people, like even now some of the peaceful protests, were the same things that were said about Dr. King. But now it has flipped, because anytime we have a protest and it turns out not to be peaceful, now there are people who would have back in the day disagreed with Dr. King that now use him as like a banner. What would Dr. King do? You know, right. Is this what Dr. Right. King wanted? Well, if you read the real Dr. King, no, this is not what he wouldn't want violence, but at the same time, this idea that we could all be unified without there being any major changes was just, that was not part of what he taught and what he believed in. And so
one of the big turning points for me was when I read his letters from the Birmingham jail.
Yes.
That is very different tone and a very different cry for action than what we hear and see in all just the little memes and the quotes that people share on social media on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Yes. And here's the thing. The same thing that he found then doing the work is the same thing that I find now doing the work. And that is the person, the group that is most detrimental to really progressing in this work is the white moderate that calls for peace.
Wow. Okay.
And
Tell us more.
Well, it remains the same, because in this idea of calling for peace, I think one of his quotes was along the lines of, you know, basically the absence of justice. And that's what some of these people are calling for, you know, peace with the absence of justice, which basically is just saying, you know what, I want you to calm down and just accept what is happening.
We can still be friends even though we have a difference of opinion, right? That's what's
exactly
being said. We don't have to agree on this, but let's still be friends.
Let's still be friends. The problem is that we can't be friends if our disagreement, like I've seen on some memes, if our disagreement is rooted in my oppression.
Mm-hmm.
We can't be friends. And so right now we're living in a country where at this point, we're going to be forced to deal with the oppression that has for too long been allowed to propagate in America. And so that is what Dr. King was talking about. And so the people even now that are saying, you know, we need peace, there's no peace that can be had by negotiating with people who are on the same side with Nazis.
Wow, right.
I don't know how to find a middle ground between my vision of America and their vision of America. I don't know how to, and I really try to consider myself a person that is able to reach across and pull people along, etc. But I can't pull you along by compromising.
I saw one of the most brilliant posts by a gentleman that I used to attend church with. He has since moved, but a very intelligent man, but he made a post saying about the same thing, that he tries to maintain openness for conversation, even if he has opposing viewpoints of another. But the way he worded it is, he said, if I'm looking at a block of cheese, but you're telling me that this is a listening device created by deep state, and I know it's a block of cheese, we have nothing to talk about.
Right? How do you negotiate with that?
And so I think about that when you said, you know, the Nazis, you know, when we see people wearing sweatshirts and T-shirts that applaud what happened in the Holocaust and that allude to being on the side of the Nazis in the Holocaust, how do we have a conversation about this? How do we gosh, I don't want a middle ground.
I don't want a middle ground.
Nazis. So bringing this back to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what do you think he would think? That's the big question. What would MLK Jr. say? Well, let's talk about what he would say.
And we talk about what he would say by looking at some of his other speeches. I mean, Our God is Marching On. That's a great speech. The Montgomery bus boycott speech that he gave when he went down to begin that whole process. He talked about the fact that there are things that right now we have to sacrifice. And in that sacrifice, we have to be unified. But to be clear, he wasn't saying be unified with the people on the other side who were who were saying that it's okay for Black people to continue to be subjugated and relegated to the back of the bus. The unity he was talking about was the unity of people on the same side. And so that's what we need now. We do need unity, but we need unity of purpose for those people who have the same vision of America that we do. But here's another speech that I really loved. His proud to be maladjusted speech. And I love that because part, again, of these calls is that, we need to be Americans. I mean, we do need to be Americans. I'm proud to be American. I'm proud. I want to be American in an America that is the land of opportunity for all people, that respects the lives of all people, that allows for opportunities for all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their socioeconomic status,
gender, sexual
orientation, all of that. I want it for all of these people. So, and when he went to Dartmouth College in 1962, at the end of his speech, he says, "But I say to you, my friends, as I move to my conclusion, there are certain things in our nation and in the world which I am proud to be maladjusted, and which I hope all men of goodwill will be maladjusted until the good societies realize. I say very honestly that I never intend to become adjusted to segregation and discrimination." And so that's where we stand right now, is that these two Americas are having a hard time merging, because personally, we've gotten to the point where more and more people are saying, I'm not going to adjust anymore to segregation and discrimination.
As a matter of adjust to a group of people who have Nazi sympathizers as a part of the core of their belief system.
Exactly. One of my favorite memes is out there.
Tell me.
Is the one that's where it's like a rally and there's a salt shaker on stage and the audience is filled with slugs and they're holding signs that say,
I have not seen that.
Slugs for salt.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that's what it's like, though. The lady, am I going to sit here and really try to find a common ground with people who don't value my humanity? No, I don't have any. I'm not going to adjust to them. I'm actually going to be proud to be maladjusted to them, as Dr. King said. Yeah, no, I can't do that. Okay, so then another one that I really like is The Other America. He gave that speech at Stanford University almost a year to the day before his death. And so, and here's the thing about it. This was a speech that he gave about 10 days after he gave a really, really controversial speech. It was called Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. And in that one, he talked about how right then they were sending Black men over to Vietnam to fight for rights for people in that country that Black people didn't even enjoy in Georgia, in America.
Wow.
Okay. I know. So powerful. And so then he basically came out as kind of against the Vietnam War and against Black men being drafted to go and fight in that war. And as you know, at that time, there were a few people that were beginning to speak out, because you had Muhammad Ali that had basically said, no, I'm not going. And he paid the price for that. He was unable to fight for 3 years. Yeah. So this was very controversial for him to speak out at the time. And it was another one of the reasons why, he was deemed unpatriotic, etc. for it. But then about 10 days after that, he gave the Other Americas speech. And he did describe this idea that there are two Americas. So he said in here, one America is beautiful for situation. Millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the ebullience of hope into the fatigue of despair. They find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. And so that's the other thing that people sometimes don't realize is that Dr. King spoke out not just against racism, but also against socioeconomic inequities a lot. And so in this particular speech, he's describing these two Americas as basically there's for one set of people, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of, material goods, material wealth. And we could go into the whole history of that, but we won't on this podcast.
What I like about that quote from The Other America is I feel like, how could you and I truly be friends if I didn't acknowledge that your family, your children, grow up in a different America than my children? We've talked about this in other podcasts. Your son is not going to be given the same leniency as my son if they are pulled over or if they are in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's not that I have to carry shame and guilt. It's not that I have to constantly apologize to you, but I have to see it. I have to accept it. And going back to the I have a dream speech, he wasn't calling for color blindness. I can't say, well, Heather, I don't see your children as Black children. I just see them as children. Well, that doesn't help you. That doesn't help your kids.
And I want to go a step further because not only do you have to accept that we have these two Americas, but you also have to start doing the work, which you're doing, start doing the work of trying to make sure that my son's America, my daughter's America looks more like your son and your daughter's America.
There's a power in my voice. There's a power in my vote. There's a power in my relationships with all of the people within my realm of influence.
There is. Exactly. And so that's what we have to do. I just want to celebrate the real Dr. King. I want to celebrate the person who in his day and his time was hated to the point that he was assassinated. He was murdered. I want to celebrate the reality of that person because that person was brave. That person said what needed to be said, even if there would be consequences for saying it, So when I look at the Colin Kaepernicks, when I look at some of the people that we have today who are facing so much backlash because they are speaking up for others, I see within them the real Dr. King, the brave one, the one, everyone wants to sometimes act like they were just going for a walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Correct.
They were just going for a little stroll.
And as a teacher, or, you used to be a teacher in your experience, why don't we teach that more strongly? That was not something that I learned in school or that I think my children learned in school. These weren't just peaceful walks. These weren't walks that were accepted and embraced during that time. As you mentioned before, Dr. King was accused of coming on too strong at the wrong time. Even by the President of the United States told him, you need to just wait. This isn't the right time.
Right.
Even things like sitting at the counter and refusing to get up from the lunch counter was considered too much. Those were not approved of, just like Colin Kaepernick and kneeling. So he was considered un-American and unpatriotic for kneeling during the national anthem. Yet this other group of people who could not and would not accept that was his protest and a peaceful protest ripped down American flags from our Capitol building, brought Confederate flags into the Capitol building.
Yeah. wiped their feces across the walls of the
Okay,
Capitol.
so I think I was the last person to hear of that. And
Isn't that gross?
I don't even know how to wrap my mind around that. For one, that's kind of behavior that you expect in a zoo, not like in any place inhabited by people, or even during protests. So I am having a hard time not laughing, even though it's it's not funny. But how do you not
It's
laugh?
not funny, but at the same time, you are grown people and you went into the bathroom, you took a poo into your hands, and then you smeared it. Oh, that's just so gross. Delaney.
I only had one. I think I had one incident of that as a parent of I'm not even sure I had a full incident of that as a parent of a toddler. I might personally just be like, here's the deal. I can't clean this building now. We're going to have to start all over and just build a new Capitol.
Let's just tear this whole thing down and start.
I'm not sure I can help this. It's probably a good thing right now that we're all very accustomed to gloves and masks and hazmat suits because I'm pretty careful about not getting the Rona. Like, I'm not scared. I'm just careful, right? But I'm certainly scared of a grown man or woman's poo in a corner. Like that, I don't want any part of. That is definitely worse than kneeling during the national anthem. I'm just going to go ahead and state that my belief is that is worse than kneeling during the national anthem.
Every time I think about this, I think of that meme from Schitt's Creek where David is just in the blue gloves and he's going, that's disgusting.
Right.
Like right now, if I had a thought bubble above my head and you guys could see me, you audience, you would see that, yes, that's disgusting. You would see
I would be Alexis. Ew, David.
Okay, it's not funny, Delaney.
But, I will say, I choose to believe that the vast, vast majority of people are absolutely against wiping your feces on anything as a part of a protest. So I'm going to say that the vast majority of people on any side anywhere are against that.
You would think so.
However, you have to look at kind of the actions as a whole. That happened. The Nazi sympathizing shirts and sweatshirts, the ripping down of the United States flag to put up other flags. This all came as a whole. This was the movement that took over the Capitol on that day. This is the other America.
That's the other America.
And that's the America
where
that we do not want to, that we want to be maladjusted to. We do not want to adjust to that America.
Yes. And I have resented, as we've gone along, I've resented a lot of the comparisons to other protest movements. Because, like, for instance, if we look at the March for Our Lives, that is about children who have decided that they don't want to be scared in their classrooms anymore.
Okay.
They don't want to be scared of being shot in their classrooms anymore. When we look at the March for Science, that is about the fact that, hey, right now we've got all of these changes happening, and we have to support the fact that science can solve a lot of this if we believe in the science and the methodologies that have been used in order to arrive at the conclusions.
And if we believe in the scientists and
in the scientists, exactly. When we look at Black Lives Matter, that is a whole movement of people who are just simply saying police brutality is not acceptable. The deaths of Black men at the hands of police indiscriminately is not acceptable. We've got to find better ways to police in our society.
The thing is, that movement actually spills over because there have been instances we have seen where the victims have not been Black. And it's still a part of it. And
yet Black Lives Matter was still there saying and said death was not acceptable.
Correct. And that these officers need to be held accountable for their actions.
Yeah. So we look at all of those marches and all of those protests, and we can go through many, many more. The Women's March. The Women's March was about the fact that there were people who feared exactly what they, has happened, that it would happen. But the reason why a Women's March was organized is to simply say, hey, some of this stuff will not be acceptable. Yes, it was to protest his election, but it was, more about the fact that we're standing for, here are the things we're standing for as far as their, how they're connected to women and the rights of equity for women. So when we look at all of those movements, there was a humanity-based, an equity-based reason for people to be protesting. There was a reason that was based in discrimination and oppression. The people that were in the Capitol, they just simply were upset because their guy didn't win. And so, I don't want to oversimplify that, because right now, some of those people, what they're feeling is they do feel oppressed, because the loss of privilege can feel like oppression. Mm-hmm. If they're used to getting 2 pieces of every pie, and now all of a sudden they're down to 1 piece because they've got to share that pie with more people. They've got to let more people have pie.
People that haven't had a piece of pie.
They've got to, make it more equitable so that everyone gets the same slice. Then that's going to feel like oppression to them. And so that's why when we look at that particular movement, we cannot look at it without examining white supremacy and the role that it played in what happened in the Capitol. And so that gets back to what we're saying. When it comes to Dr. King's speeches looked at society from a very honest, straightforward lens, and looked at the role that socioeconomic oppression played and then racial oppression played in some of the things that were happening. And the people in general, white people in general, the people that were at the top of society at that time, they did not like him for that. And so we need to discover, as we are doing our work this weekend, as we're looking to celebrate Dr. King, we need to discover, how are we going to be brave like he was?
Right.
How are we going to be maladjusted like he was?
So for our listeners, for anyone who is joining us in this discussion, what are your recommendations? What would you like to tell people to do, to listen to read, in order to experience the real Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as opposed to the one that has been wrapped up in a pretty little package with a bow of color blindness? Where would you point people?
First, if you're going to listen to the I Have a Dream speech, make sure it's the full and complete, not just the pieces that have been pulled out for, quite frankly, white comfort. But then start looking at some of his other speeches. So Letters from Birmingham Jail, that is not a speech. Of course, that was actually a letter, but read it,
It's powerful.
It's powerful. Read it. And then the speech that I mentioned, Proud to be Maladjusted, read that speech. Read The Other America. Read Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. I think that would be a really good one, because right now, some of you, audience, you're facing that choice. How do you break the silence? And how do you accept the consequences that may come from breaking the silence? And so I get that. So read that speech and think about the fact that Dr. King, he was breaking his silence on the Vietnam War that was such a hot button issue, just like we have now. And then, as I always say, find your role. Find your role and play it, whatever that role may be. Everyone right now on our side has a role to play in making sure that we truly become one America, and that people don't experience to America, a different America simply because of their sexual orientation, or because of their skin color, or because of their religion, or any other factors. So we have a responsibility in making one America that is about all of us and the acceptance of all of us. So find what your role is and begin to play it. And then I would say learn what it means to be maladjusted.
Right. Absolutely.
Think about, after you read that speech, sit and think about that question. For me, what does it mean to be maladjusted? I don't know. I don't know what it's going to mean to you, but you have to decide upon that and then build from there. So,
and I would like to add that, for anyone listening who wants to further these conversations, who's looking for more information, follow our organization, In Purpose Educational Services. We're on Facebook. We make a lot of posts on this. We have conversations. Anyone who becomes a supporter of ours on Patreon gets access to a group in Facebook that's private where these conversations can happen in more length. And we chime in on those and have conversations with people. It's a great group of people. We have an email. Why don't you give our email, Heather, in case anybody has comments, questions, and would like to send us an email? It may be questions that we can address in further episodes.
Right. So if you do have questions, you can email us at info@inpurposeea.com. That is inpurposeea.com. Well, Delaney, it's been nice talking about Dr. King and how he remains, and his words and his legacy remains relevant today, and actually how it is especially important to learn from him with everything that's going on today. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the call to dive deeper and to learn more, and to even make sure that I myself am paying attention not only to the easy Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the comfortable Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but the true Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So thank you, Heather.
I'll talk to you next time.
Sounds great. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode. You can support us on Patreon by looking for the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at InPurposeES. That is INPurposeES. You can also follow us on Twitter at InPurposeEA, or visit our website at www.inpurposeea.com.
Heather, this was great. Do you want to do it again next week?
I sure do, Delaney.
Awesome. Talk to you then.
Bye.